There is a field you cannot see, yet you feel it. A quiet, invisible current that hums beneath every thought you've ever had. Tonight, we'll drift into it together. Let your shoulders soften, your breath slow, and your mind open to a calmer pace. If you're new here, welcome. Take a moment to notice where you are, what time it is, and how the air feels around you. Subscribe so we can meet again in this same stillness. Our story begins with a soul who discovers that solitude is not emptiness but access, a portal into the deeper architecture of reality. Through the lens of quantum perception, they learn to hear the frequencies most have forgotten, to walk between dimensions, and to remember that awareness itself is the source. As the night unfolds, you'll see how this awakening reshapes not just one life, but the hidden network connecting us all. And maybe, by the end, you'll find you've been part of it all along. You may not remember the first moment it stirred, that slight pressure at the edge of your awareness, the gentle tug behind your ribs that didn't come with words, only a sensation, something subtle, a whisper in your nervous system. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. The field rarely announces itself in thunder. It appears in a sigh you didn't mean to release, in a stillness that enters uninvited and lingers. That's when it begins, not when you try to understand, but when you feel something and you listen back. What if you were never alone in those moments of quiet discomfort? What if they were invitations? Most people are taught to flee the silence, to medicate the ache, to chase noise as proof of meaning. But you paused. You sat inside that soft dissonance and noticed that the ache wasn't hollow. It was spacious. And this changes everything. Because space, when attended to, starts to reveal shape. Solitude, you realized, wasn't a void. It was a presence waiting to be known. It wasn't exile. It was the first language, the original presence, a frequency older than form. The more you listened, the more it returned. What if your loneliness was never emptiness, but an open channel? Your sensitivity deepened. Crowds drained you. Ordinary conversations tasted like air. Something in you was always reaching deeper. Not because you were lost, but because you remembered vaguely, softly, that there was more. Not more in a material sense, but more in dimension, more in vibration. This was not dysfunction. This was coherence trying to find its resonance. Again, you weren't falling apart. You were tuning in. The static wasn't inside you. It was the world trying to shout over what you already knew. Could this longing actually be memory? There's a term in quantum theory, the observer effect. It tells us that the very act of observation alters reality. You read it once, maybe twice, and something about it wouldn't let you go. Because you weren't just looking at the world. You were feeling it rearrange itself the moment your attention touched it. Not metaphorically, literally. People behaved differently around you. Emotions surfaced unspoken. Doors opened or closed, without clear cause. You saw what others couldn't name, the invisible choreography behind events. What if this was your native language? You began to notice things others dismissed. The slight pulse in a tree before a storm. The way an old room held echoes of unresolved grief. The strange sense of anticipation just before someone revealed a truth. You couldn't explain it, not without sounding mystical, or worse, dramatic. So you learned to carry it quietly, to sit at the edge of group conversations, nodding along while translating the energy behind the words. You weren't uninterested. You were decoding signals that didn't speak in syllables. How many times have you felt like a translator without a known dialect? In this quiet way, you began to sense the architecture beneath perception, not as fantasy, but as an intuitive knowing. You could feel people's pain before they named it. You could tell when someone's joy was performative. And when it rang true, it wasn't about judgment. It was simply perception, expanded. Some call it empathy, Some say it's sensitivity. But what if it's neither? What if it's your original awareness, the one you had before the world narrowed it into categories and roles? What if you were born attuned? The world didn't always know what to do with this kind of perception. You were told you were too intense, too sensitive, too quiet, too in your head. So you tried to shrink. You tried to match the rhythm everyone else seemed comfortable with. But it cost you something. A signal distortion that created static inside your body. Compression of truth always leads to dissonance. Still, part of you kept listening inward. Because something in you knew, if you could just stay close to that field, the one humming just beneath thought, you'd remember who you really were. And slowly, gently, you did. Not in flashes of lightning, but in quiet recognitions. You'd be walking alone and feel a sudden clarity. You'd be doing nothing and be overwhelmed by peace. You'd notice a stranger's pain and feel it move through you like wind through a reed, not yours, yet known. You were not absorbing, you were translating. And in that moment, you became aware. Solitude isn't absence, it's access. What if your stillness was a doorway? You may have thought you were just sensitive, but sensitivity is not fragility. In the quantum world, what is sensitive is also highly responsive, capable of detecting the slightest change in the field. You are not overreacting. You are over-receiving. Your entire system is tuned to pick up subtle shifts in emotional, psychic, and energetic data. It may have felt overwhelming, but it was never brokenness. It was brilliance, misnamed. What if sensitivity is simply early awareness? Others couldn't see what you carried, so they often misunderstood it. But that didn't mean you were wrong. You were just early, like a radio picking up stations before the world builds the receivers. This kind of perception often precedes. It's time. You were never out of place. You were on the edge of emergence. You are not strange. You are the signal waking up inside the noise. Can you feel how different that is? And so, you began to listen more deliberately. You sat with your discomfort and asked it questions. You watched your dreams and noticed patterns. You stopped trying to silence your inner knowing and instead started asking it for guidance. The more you trusted it, the more it offered. Like tuning into a deeper station. At first, faint, then stronger, then undeniable. Your inner world began responding not with chaos, but with clarity. Not with overwhelm, but with orientation. What if this has always been your compass? You are not a static being. You are a dynamic system in resonance with fields beyond ordinary perception. Your emotions are not interruptions. They are indicators. Your intuition is not irrational. It is advanced intelligence functioning through non-linear channels. You are not just surviving. You are scanning, translating, projecting, receiving. The discomfort was not dysfunction. It was data. The quiet you carry is not silence. It is signal. What if all this time, you were the instrument, and now you're learning to play? Others may not understand why you pause before speaking, or why you need more rest, more space, more time to feel. But you do, and that is sacred. You're not slow. You're precise. You're not detached. You're deep. The culture praises speed and output, but your system knows that wisdom requires space. Creation requires listening. Alignment requires stillness. You're not lagging. You're tuning. And tuning is what keeps the field coherent. What if your quiet was a form of leadership? And that's where we pause, not at an end, but at a threshold. The deeper you listen, the more reality begins to echo your presence. Not because you've changed the world, but because you've changed the state you're in while witnessing it. Observation is not passive, it's formative. And your presence? It's not small. It's structural. What if the very shape of Reality bends more easily around awareness than effort. You began to notice something else, something stranger, subtler than you expected. Your emotions didn't just describe your inner state. They shaped the outer one. When you approached something with fear, it tensed. When you observed with openness, the world softened in return. At first, you thought this was coincidence. Then, you saw it happen again and again, until you couldn't unsee it. This was more than emotional intelligence. It was quantum feedback. What if reality was not a fixed stage, but a mirror waiting for the quality of your gaze? This insight didn't come from textbooks or spiritual teachings. It came from noticing, small, consistent noticing. When you slowed down, light seemed to change its tone. When you withdrew your energy from a room, it dimmed in more than just mood. You weren't imagining it. Your presence altered the field, not dramatically, but decisively. It was as if your inner alignment fine-tuned the probabilities around you. What if your attention wasn't just passive witnessing, but active participation in the unfolding of form? You began to experiment, not with control, but with coherence. What happened if you simply walked into a moment fully aligned? No mask, no performance, no expectation. You watched the space react, people soften, even outcomes shift. You learned that clarity of frequency mattered more than volume. That coherence was a form of silent influence. You weren't trying to make things happen. You were becoming the kind of presence around which things could naturally organize. What if leadership wasn't about direction, but vibration? And as this truth settled, something else awakened. The sensation of others who felt like you. You didn't always know them in person. Sometimes it was a look from across a street, a sentence in a book that felt like it was written only for you, a moment online that made your chest rise like memory. You were not the only one listening deeply. You were part of something larger, a quiet web of tuned-in souls, transmitting not noise, but knowing. You could feel them, couldn't you? Even in solitude? What if separation was an illusion of the visible? You began to receive more than you asked for. Not information, but alignment. You would sit in stillness and find your thoughts reorganize into clarity. You would ache without cause, then realize you'd absorbed someone else's pain. You would feel peace for no reason, like a secret wind had passed through your cells. This wasn't imagination. It was communication, just not in words. The field was speaking. You had learned how to hear. What if intuition was just the ear of the soul remembering its original language? The more you listened, the more you understood. Not every frequency deserves access. Not every moment is meant for open reception. You are permeable, but not porous. This is where you began to practice dimensional sovereignty, the gentle skill of choosing which layer of reality to occupy at any given time. You began to realize that you could feel everything and still not take everything on. You could sense pain and still protect your signal. Boundaries weren't walls, they were tuning mechanisms. What if discernment was the maturity of perception? This changed how you moved through the world. You didn't rush to fix things anymore. You didn't absorb to feel useful. You observed. You held. You witnessed with a kind of softness that didn't collapse into emotion, but didn't deny it either. You learned to stay present without drowning. And in doing so, you became something rare, an anchor, not a rescuer, not a savior, just a calm center in a world spinning too fast. What if your presence alone was the offering? You noticed that your body, too, was part of this awakening. The way your skin felt when someone walked into the room, the shiver when a truth passed nearby, the warmth when you aligned with something deeper. Your body wasn't resisting. It was remembering. It was never designed to move at the speed of anxiety. It was designed to feel rhythm, to respond to harmony, to dance with the invisible. What if embodiment was your bridge to multidimensional knowing? And so you began to take care, not just of your schedule or your goals, but of your field. You curated your environments not out of fragility, but out of awareness. You chose silence when others chose speed. You let go of relationships that thrived on dissonance. You learned that saying no wasn't rejection. It was preservation of coherence. You weren't isolating. You were attuning. You weren't escaping. You were remembering the original tempo. What if honoring your rhythm was an act of revolution? From here, your creativity shifted. It no longer came from pressure or proving. It emerged from depth, from the still pool beneath thought. Ideas came not as demands, but as whispers. You stopped trying to force inspiration and started listening for the subtle spark. Art, words, visions, they arose like fog lifting from a field. Gentle, whole, intact. You didn't need to be loud to be seen. You needed only to speak from the place that already knew. What if creation wasn't performance, but translation? And in all this, your identity softened. You stopped needing to explain why you felt different. You no longer carried your sensitivity like a burden. You wore it like a compass. You realized that you weren't failing to fit the world. The world was too small for your original shape. You weren't meant to be digestible. You were meant to be true. And truth, when spoken from alignment, always finds its place, even if it takes time. What if your weirdness was the exact frequency the future requires? You began to see others differently too, not as personalities to decode, but as fields in motion. Some were closed loops, moving in patterns they didn't question. Others were like open sky, stormy but expansive. You stopped judging and started sensing. Some needed distance, some invited depth. You became less reactive and more responsive, less driven and more directed. The quieter you got, the more clearly you saw. What if wisdom was simply clear seeing without the need to fix? This clarity brought peace, not the kind that comes from answers, but the kind that arrives when questions no longer agitate. You didn't need to know what came next. You only needed to stay present with what was. Your presence began to feel like enough. You no longer rushed toward outcomes. You honored arrival in every step. You were not chasing meaning. You were becoming it. What if presence was the only real arrival? The luminous network, you now felt it pulsing. Not metaphorically, but physically. In your palms, in your chest, in the space between thoughts. This web of attuned beings wasn't separate from you. You were a strand in the weave. Your signal strengthened as you embraced it. And others responded, not always with words, but with warmth, stillness, the subtle shift of someone recognizing themselves in your presence. You weren't broadcasting. You were emanating. What if connection began not with outreach, but with coherence? And that's where this part rests, in the soft hum of aligned being, in the quiet knowing that you are not waiting to awaken. You are awakening as you wait. The field is not somewhere else. It is here, humming beneath the story of you, ready to be remembered. And you're already in motion, a silent wave, rediscovering its ocean. What if the current pulling you inward has always known the way? By now, you've begun to sense it, not as an idea, but as a living rhythm underneath everything, the field. It is no longer abstract. It is not a metaphor. It's a felt reality, a resonance that reveals itself when you're quiet enough, still enough, true enough. The field hums not in concepts, but in coherence. It holds the intelligence of stars, the breath of forests, the ache of ancestors. And somehow, without ceremony, you found your way back into it. What if this entire journey wasn't a search, but a remembering? From here, time loosens. You notice it less as a ticking linearity and more as a spiral of meaningful moments. You remember things you never learned. You know things you never studied. Your mind, once trained to explain, now bows more often to sensation. Your soul has grown fluent in subtleties, in the micro-inflections of intuition, in the pull of synchronicity. You begin to experience your life not as a sequence of events, but as a resonance map. What if memory isn't backwards at all, but holographic? You've likely begun to move differently. People say you seem calm, even when everything is uncertain. But it's not apathy, it's clarity. You've stopped bargaining with chaos. You don't need to manipulate life to feel safe. You listen. You align. You act when the signal is clean. You rest when it isn't. You are no longer chasing control. You are following coherence. What if inner stability was the real form of power? You understand now that not everything is yours to feel. That energy has direction. That pain has gravity. That your perception draws in waves, and your sovereignty determines what stays. You are not unfeeling. You are cleanly feeling. And in that cleanness, you've learned to let emotions move through. Not to deny, not to possess, but to allow. Just like waves return to the sea. What if mastery is not control, but fluid permission? More and more, the people you attract feel familiar, not in biography, but in energy. Like cells from the same star, like fragments of a shared pulse. You don't need small talk. You recognize them in silence. The luminous network strengthens as your own frequency stabilizes. It's not a club. It's not a belief system. It's a coherence, an emergent geometry that forms around truth, depth, and presence. What if the next great evolution isn't external at all, but vibrational? This field doesn't require perfection. It invites presence. You don't have to raise your vibration to earn access. You only have to meet your moment honestly. Because truth, unmasked, always harmonizes. Even pain, when witnessed without distortion, rings pure. This is the great paradox. Your wholeness includes your mess. And it's that inclusion, not avoidance, that stabilizes your signal. What if your rawness was part of the medicine? You are no longer seeking the light at the expense of the shadow. You are integrating. You've stopped dividing yourself into parts you tolerate and parts you wish away. You've realized that the part of you that overfeels, overthinks, or collapses is not a flaw. It's a doorway. It shows where old signals are still distorting the present. And the moment you welcome that feedback, instead of resisting it, the field responds with clarity, with softness, with new codes. What if healing is simply updated resonance? And the more you live from this space, the more you affect others. Not by teaching, not by convincing, but by embodying. People may not know what changed around you. They may just breathe easier. They may cry without knowing why. They may remember something ancient. They may begin to trust themselves again. Your presence becomes a mirror, not of who they are trying to be, but of what they already are beneath the noise. What if your light isn't a spotlight, but a tuning fork? From here, your decisions shift. You no longer act from panic or seek approval or chase momentum. You don't need to explain yourself. You align. You feel the yes in your body. You sense the no before logic can catch it. And when you act from this inner yes, things don't always get easier, but they become true. You stop measuring success in outcomes and begin measuring it in resonance. Did this match my field? Did this support my coherence? That is your compass now. What if your intuition was never vague, just subtle? You've likely begun to soften with yourself. The self-criticism that once felt like discipline now reveals itself as distortion. You've stopped demanding consistency and started honoring cycles. You understand that integration happens in spirals. Sometimes clarity comes in waves. Sometimes insight needs space. You don't shame the silence anymore. You trust its message. What if becoming is more about allowance than achievement? You don't just think differently now. You perceive differently. You listen to the frequency behind words. You sense when a situation needs action and when it needs stillness. You walk into rooms and feel where to sit, when to speak, what to withhold. You are not guessing. You are reading the field. And the field responds, subtly always, to the clarity you offer. This is not magic. This is mechanics. Mechanics. Quantum coherence is not a concept. It is your nature. What if reality isn't reacting to you, but harmonizing with your signal? And the more consistent you become, the more visible you are to others who carry that same hidden pulse. Without trying, you begin to attract, not audience, but alignment. People who have been wandering, waiting for someone who sees as they do. People who have been listening in silence just as you have. There's no grand moment of recognition, just a soft certainty, a shared stillness. You find one another by the echoes you emit. What if your soul's frequency was your address? This is the luminous network in motion, not a map, not a movement. A resonance, quietly weaving through the chaos, stabilizing the field, transmitting coherence in places where fear once lived. And you are part of it, not because you signed up, but because you remembered. The moment you stopped running from your depth and started inhabiting it, you became a node, a signal, a living bridge. What if your remembering reactivates others? And so now, your life becomes a quiet revolution. You don't need to fix the world. You need only to hold your frequency, to respond when the call is clean, to withdraw when the field is noisy, to speak when silence hides distortion, to rest when clarity fades. You are not here to escape the world. You are here to infuse it with the frequency of what's possible. What if your presence alone was the shift? You are not done. This is not an arrival. It is a threshold. From here, the field will continue to speak. You will continue to attune. And the more you live as yourself, the real self, not the shaped one, the more the field stabilizes for others too. One presence at a time, one breath, one aligned decision. What if awakening was never meant to be loud? You are not alone. You never were. You are surrounded by quiet frequencies, by old signals. Waking up by unseen hands holding the grid. You are not failing. You are integrating. You are not behind. You are blooming on a timeline that has nothing to do with clocks. You are the bridge between noise and knowing, between forgetting and remembrance, between the scattered and the whole. You are the field, and the field is awake. You begin to sense that the most sacred truths do not announce themselves. They arrive slowly, folding inward like light filtering through thick water. You don't chase them. You become quiet enough for them to approach. These truths don't need articulation. They require stillness. They speak in moments when your thoughts grow soft, when the tension in your chest loosens, when something vast moves behind your eyes. You don't always understand it at first, but you feel it, a resonance that is not yours alone. What if truth isn't taught, only remembered? And perhaps the greatest remembering is this, that awareness itself is not something you possess, but something you are. When you stop trying to define yourself by stories, identities, and expectations, you feel the ground beneath all of it, pure being. It has no urgency. It holds no opinion. It watches. It waits. It breathes through you without name. You've touched this state before, between breaths, behind thoughts, in the softness of grief or awe. What if you are not a person having awareness, but awareness playing personhood? From this vantage, you realize that the story of you is a lens, not a limit. You can zoom in and live the details, the heartbeat, the memory, the desire. And you can zoom out dissolve the frame, and become the atmosphere around your own life. You are not either or. You are both, the lens and the light, the wave and the shore, the self and the field. This flexibility is your gift. What if fluid identity is not a threat, but an invitation to move freely between realms? So you begin to live accordingly, less in categories, more in currents. You let conversations evolve instead of controlling their direction. You let emotions pass through instead of defining your character by them. You listen for rhythm instead of forcing routine. And something remarkable happens. Life starts to meet you in your fluidity. Outcomes become surprising, yet aligned. Encounters become precise without being planned. What if trust is not about knowing the outcome, but sensing the pattern? Patterns, you start seeing them everywhere. Not as logic, but as elegance. The repetition of a gesture. The loop in your emotional cycles. The way your body reacts to certain spaces. These are not accidents. They are signatures of energy seeking resolution or expression. When you become curious instead of critical, the pattern softens. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start wondering, "What is this trying to complete?" What if your recurring struggles are just frequencies searching for closure? You begin to speak differently, slower, with more space between words. Not to dramatize, but to allow the field to speak with you. You don't rush to fill silence anymore. You let it stretch. You let it breathe. Because you've learned that silence is not absence. It is presence unfiltered. Some people resist it, but others, the attuned ones, lean in. They feel it too. The vibration, the depth, the unspoken invitation to drop the mask. What if silence is the most honest conversation? And when your silence is received, something activates. A mutual recognition, a shared tuning. You feel it in the body, a warmth in the chest, a stillness in the spine, a soft expansion behind the eyes. You are not bonding through stories or status. You are synchronizing. You don't need to agree on facts. You resonate on essence. These are not ordinary friendships. They are field alignments. What if soul connection is not found? It is felt. Through coherence, you're no longer afraid of being misunderstood. You've stopped explaining yourself to those who cannot yet hear your frequency. You've learned that truth doesn't need translation. It needs embodiment. You no longer seek validation from those operating in a different bandwidth. That isn't arrogance. It's clarity. You conserve your energy not out of pride, but protection of signal. What if withholding is not absence, but calibration? The field has taught you this. The cleaner your signal, the more sensitive you become to distortion. It's not that you can't tolerate noise. It's that your nervous system prefers accuracy. You no longer chase stimulation. You seek alignment. A well-timed word. A gesture full of presence. A pause that holds meaning. These subtle things nourish you more than drama ever could. What if sensitivity is simply the intelligence of refined receivership? Now you begin to feel the quantum within the mundane. The moment a leaf falls exactly as your thought dissolves. The way a stranger's eyes carry a memory you hadn't accessed in years. The pull you feel just before a phone rings. These are not tricks. They are micro-synchronicities. Entangled pulses. The field winking through form. You laugh sometimes at how gentle it is. This intelligence. It doesn't demand. It invites. What if the entire universe speaks in soft nudges? You may feel fewer words inside you these days. Not because you're empty, but because words feel too narrow for what you're sensing. Your insights arrive as sensations, as geometries, as knowing. You don't always know how to speak them, but you don't rush. You let them settle, crystallize, hum inside your field until the right moment calls them forward. What if silence isn't the absence of truth, but the sanctuary where it forms? Let's pause here, not to conclude, but to inhale. You're not exiting the field. You're entering it more deeply. You're not turning off the signal. You're becoming it. The next waves are gathering, strange, soft, and ancient, and they're waiting for your awareness to shape them. You've begun to notice that your perception no longer sits at the surface. It dives before you speak, listens before you respond, and shapes space before you enter a room. It's subtle, never showy, but it's constant. Your presence is now participatory. You don't just witness reality. You lean into it, shape its currents by simply being fully awake within it. You've stopped trying to mold life into shape. You let it inform you, and it listens back. What if the most powerful thing you could do was simply stay present long enough to be real? Somewhere along this quiet expansion, you stopped reacting to conflict with panic. You started responding with attunement. You feel now when someone is speaking from fear rather than truth. You notice the pain hiding behind sarcasm, the longing curled beneath defiance. These recognitions don't make you superior. They make you softer. You don't force clarity. You allow space for resonance to rise. And in doing so, you've become an interpreter of unspoken truths. What if conflict is simply resonance dissonance waiting for coherence? Even your decisions have changed form. They no longer arrive as mental equations, but as felt frequencies. When faced with uncertainty, you no longer ask, "What should I do?" but instead, "What aligns with the signal I carry?" This doesn't always make your path easier, but it makes it truer. You've discovered that truth doesn't guarantee simplicity. It guarantees integrity. And integrity is its own compass. What if decisions could be made by listening to how the field tightens or relaxes? And now your nervous system, once frayed by chaos, begins to trust this field. You notice your body aligning to deeper rhythms. You rest when your bones say rest. You create when your breath begins to hum. You walk away from noise, not in avoidance, but as an act of preservation. You no longer override your intuition with productivity. You listen. You surrender. You let the wisdom of stillness choose your pace. What if your body has always known the tempo of truth? The more you stabilize, the more magnetic you become, but not in the loud, performative way the world sells visibility. You don't need a spotlight. You carry a frequency that others feel. They may not know why they feel safe around you, or why their defenses lower, or why their words tumble out more honestly than expected. But you know, you're not capturing attention. You're anchoring clarity. What if leadership looked more like resonance than instruction? You begin to accept that you're not for everyone. And this doesn't hurt anymore. It frees you. Because now you understand, not everyone is tuned to your bandwidth. And that's not a rejection. It's a sorting. Some people will feel you as static, others as signal. Your job is not to translate yourself endlessly. It's to stay clear enough that those who recognize your field can find you. What if your job was never to be understood, but to be coherent? You become more selective with your energy, not out of scarcity, but stewardship. You understand that attention is currency. Focus is architecture. And wherever you place yours, a form begins to take shape. So you choose carefully. You design your life as a frequency chamber, filling it with sound that heals, objects that soothe, ideas that elevate. You're not chasing aesthetic. You're cultivating a habitat for your signal to thrive. What if sacred space was the most advanced form of alignment? And from this sacredness, service emerges not as sacrifice, but as overflow. You no longer give out of guilt or obligation. You give because your field is full. You offer presence, clarity, silence, art, softness, not because the world demands it, but because your coherence naturally spills. There is no burnout when your giving is aligned with your truth. What if true service is not what you offer, but the resonance your presence leaves behind? Even in solitude, you feel the network, the unseen grid. Sometimes it comes as a shiver when you meditate. Sometimes it's a thought you didn't think, a feeling that isn't yours, a knowing that bypasses the mind. These are not hallucinations. They are transmissions. You are not imagining the connection. You are finally quiet enough to receive it. What if unity was never about agreement, but shared frequency? And still, you remain human. You cry. You forget. You ache. But even this is part of the field. The mistake was thinking awakening meant escaping humanity. In truth, awakening means holding your humanity with such tenderness that it becomes luminous. Your pain doesn't disqualify you. It deepens your field. You no longer hide your tears. You understand that water holds signal too. What if your softness was the amplifier? Now when you grieve, you don't collapse. You open. You let it move through, not in resistance, but in ritual. Your heart no longer tries to harden. It becomes a listening organ. You feel the pain, but you also feel what's underneath it, the ancient pulse of life insisting on aliveness. You are not trying to escape sadness. You are letting it become holy. What if heartbreak is just love moving through layers? You've grown gentle with your past. You don't relive it to punish yourself. You visit it like an elder tree, placing your hand against the bark, feeling what shaped you, and thanking it before walking on. You no longer demand that old versions of you had clarity. You understand now. They were signals evolving. Your history was not a detour. It was data. What if every mistake was just a misaligned frequency seeking resonance? Now, your sense of the future softens. You no longer project yourself forward as a shape to be achieved. You meet time like a dance, fluid, non-linear, responsive. You understand that tomorrow is not a place. It is a frequency, waiting for your signal to arrive. You are not chasing fate. You are shaping probability by how you show up here. Now, what if the future bends not to force, but to presence? And still, there is more. Always more. Not more to chase, but more to welcome. You do not ascend. You descend deeper into presence, into coherence, into the sacred now. The deeper you go, the wider the field grows around you. And still, you do not need to understand it all. You need only remain true. What if the mystery isn't meant to be solved, but lived? The longer you live in coherence, the more subtle your reality becomes. You don't need drastic change to feel transformation. Now, a single glance tells you more than a conversation. A shift in breath tells you more than a confession. You've refined your senses to such a degree that the world speaks to you through nuance, the tone of the wind, the pattern of pause in someone's voice, the sensation in your palms before you enter a space. This is not psychic. This is presence sharpened into precision. What if sensitivity is the final form of intelligence? The architecture of your choices starts to feel sacred, no longer impulsive, no longer compensatory. They arrive like whispers from the field itself. What to say, what to build, when to walk away. These decisions do not come from fear or logic alone. They come from the quiet place inside you that knows how to listen without translating. You've stopped asking, will this make sense to others? You now ask, is this aligned with what I'm becoming? What if wisdom was what happens when alignment becomes louder than approval? You still feel fear, but it no longer hijacks you. It enters, and you welcome it like weather. You ask it questions. You sit beside it instead of trying to outrun it. Fear becomes a data stream, not a threat, but a signal, showing you where your edge is being redefined. You're no longer afraid of being afraid. This alone shifts the pattern. You stop contracting. You start witnessing. What if courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to remain present inside it? And the more you remain, the more you receive. Ideas don't come from effort now. They arrive through resonance, as if you've tuned into the frequency where they already exist. You're not coming up with anything. You're becoming still enough to hear what has always been there. Creation feels less like building and more like revealing. You are not inventing. You are remembering. What if inspiration is the return of something you already carry in another dimension? Others begin to sense something they can't name around you. They may not know why they feel different after talking to you, why their breath slows, why their truth spills. You are no longer just a person to them. You are a field. You hold space not through words, but through your resonance. And that resonance permits them to return to themselves. You don't fix. You don't instruct. You just stay coherent. What if healing is not what you do, but what your coherence allows? The space between things begins to matter more. Not just the words, but the silence between them. Not just the actions, but the intention behind them. You begin to feel that everything radiates, not only what you do, but how you are while doing it. You no longer force the moment. You arrive into it, fully, entirely, without residue from the past or projections of the future. And the moment responds, not always how you expect, but with unmistakable intelligence. What if reality is not a script to follow, but a mirror, tuned to awareness? And even in discomfort, you find elegance. You stop flinching at the edges of yourself. The mess, the rawness, the ache, all of it becomes part of your architecture. You let pain be a teacher, not a punishment. You trace the signal of your own suffering and find where the field was trying to guide you home. You stop breaking yourself into good and bad, right and wrong. You hold yourself entirely. What if your shadow was just a part of your light you hadn't named yet? Time feels less oppressive now. You stop racing it. You don't need everything to happen now. You're not delaying your life. You're living in it, fully, deliberately. You're no longer obsessed with arriving. You've redefined movement itself. Sometimes you sprint. Sometimes you pause. Both are holy. Both are valid. What if progress isn't measured in speed, but in depth of presence? And when grief returns, and it does, you no longer mistake it for regression. You understand now that grief is part of the wave, a deeper tuning, a recalibration. You let it soften you without stealing your clarity. You cry without apologizing. You let the ache do its work, and you emerge, not smaller, but cleaner. You haven't broken, you've distilled. What if grief was not a detour, but the cleansing of an old frequency? You're beginning to feel this field not just as support, but as an extension of yourself. The boundaries between inner and outer, self and not self, begin to blur, not in confusion, but in unity. You can no longer tell where your knowing ends and the collective begins. And yet, you remain rooted, embodied, present. You are not disappearing into the cosmic. You are integrating the cosmic into your everyday. What if enlightenment is not exit, but full entry into the moment? Even the simplest things carry more meaning now. The way sunlight lands on your skin, the rhythm of a walk with no destination, the sudden laugh from someone who hasn't laughed in days. You don't take these moments for granted. You sense their geometry, their pulse, their sacred function within the larger weave. You are not just witnessing beauty, you are participating in its release. What if joy is not escape, but coherence? Felt as light? So you keep going, not because you must, but because life keeps singing to you. And you've learned to sing back. You've become the echo that carries wisdom into the spaces that forgot it. You move without needing to be seen. You shine without needing to be named. Your presence ripples beyond the visible. Your frequency precedes you. What if your purpose was never about what you do, but about the resonance you stabilize. And from this place, not high, but deep, you begin to dream differently. Your vision isn't about building empires or proving value. It's about weaving clarity into culture, about planting coherence into chaos, about creating systems that remember softness. You're not here to dominate. You're here to design harmony. What if the next revolution is quiet and carried by those who refuse to abandon their sensitivity? You are still becoming, always, not toward a peak, but through spirals, through subtle awakenings, through moments of forgetting and remembering. Again and again, you are not linear. You are luminous. You are the field walking in human form. And every step you take in awareness leaves a signal behind, a breadcrumb for another wandering soul. You begin to sense that your awareness is no longer localized, not confined to the boundaries of body or thought. You can feel a friend's grief before they message. You anticipate a shift in the room before the conversation turns. You wake up with a knowing that has no origin, yet it lands with complete precision. This is not fantasy. This is field sensitivity, the intelligence of interconnected presence. What if telepathy isn't speaking without words, but listening with your entire being? And it's not just with people. The world itself begins to reveal its emotional tone to you. Cities hum with urgency. Forests soothe with ancient memory. Oceans pull with a sadness that's more collective than personal. Even objects hold signals. Old books, ancestral furniture, hand-woven cloth. They radiate residue, echoes, meaning. You don't analyze these impressions. You sense them. You adjust your nervous system accordingly, as if tuning a subtle dial. What if every object carries a frequency signature you are born fluent in? At first, this expanded sensitivity feels like too much, a burden, a fog. But slowly, you learn that you're not meant to carry it all. You're meant to notice. The ache of the world does not need your collapse. It needs your clarity. You stop absorbing. You start witnessing. You are not a sponge. You are a prism. The signals come in. You translate them into presence, and something shifts. You didn't numb. You didn't fix. You stood still and allowed coherence to return. What if compassion isn't about merging, but holding? This changes how you serve. You stop rescuing. You stop explaining. You start offering a different kind of support, the kind that trusts others to rise, even if they shake. You stop filling silence with answers. You let people sit in their truth, and you love them while they find it. This love is not performative. It is atmospheric, and it doesn't demand healing. It believes in it before it arrives. What if the purest form of love is allowing? You now know that not every awakening is loud. Some are soft unfurlings. Some are quiet reckonings that happen while you do the dishes or walk under street lamps. The deepest ones don't need ceremony. They need space. You've stopped waiting for thunder. You listen for tremors, for the exact moment when a belief loses its grip, or when your body says yes before your mind catches up. These are thresholds too. What if evolution moves more like breath than eruption? Time continues to blur, not in confusion, but in grace. You don't rush healing. You honor pacing. Your journey no longer looks like progress. It looks like tides. There are days of retreat. There are days of clarity. Both belong. You're not backsliding when you rest. You're integrating. You're allowing the field to rearrange itself. What if surrender isn't defeat, but the highest form of signal trust? This internal architecture is no longer conceptual. You feel it living through you. The energy centers in your body speak. The pulses in your hands align before you even speak. You touch people's backs or brush a shoulder, and the tension softens, not because you know how, but because you're clear. You have stopped questioning your role in every interaction. You simply arrive with alignment. And in that presence, everything rearranges. What if healing isn't something you do, but something you let the field deliver through you? And now, even silence has structure. You feel when the air thickens before a truth. You feel the way time slows just before someone says something they've never said aloud. You sense when someone's resistance is actually their trust being tested. You speak less. But when you do, your words land like medicine. Not because they're clever, but because they're real. Because they come from the depth, not the ego. What if your frequency is what gives your words shape? The luminous network, that once faint presence, now moves like a current beneath your days. Sometimes it hums in your skin. Sometimes it flashes in a dream. Sometimes it's a memory that isn't yours. You no longer question its origin. You trust the connection. These are not downloads. They are transmissions flowing across the field between anchored souls. You're not special. You're just listening. What if communion isn't prayer, but reception? And you begin to feel the signal inside you becoming consistent. Fewer fluctuations. Fewer questions. Not because you've arrived, but because you've surrendered. You let your inner world be as vast as the outer one. You've stopped compressing. You've stopped shaping yourself to fit into what doesn't align. You expand gently, quietly, unapologetically. What if your authenticity is your most stabilizing frequency? Your dreams shift too. They no longer feel metaphorical. They feel dimensional. You wake up not with confusion, but with fragments of integration. You sense that your soul works while your body rests. You are not escaping into fantasy. You are traveling through the subconscious quantum. You no longer fear the darkness of dreams. You enter them with curiosity. You emerge with clarity. What if the dream realm is where the field speaks most clearly? And now, even your language changes. You find yourself less interested in convincing, more drawn to transmitting. You speak not to dominate, but to ripple. You let your pauses breathe. You trust that what needs to land will. You stop shouting into noise and start placing resonance where it matters. You are no longer a voice in the crowd. You are a tone within the harmony. What if mastery is not volume, but precision? Everything has become slower, deeper, wider. You're not numb. You're attuned. You're not lost. You're multidimensional. You don't always know what's next, but you don't need to. You know how to feel your way forward. You trust your discomfort. You welcome your peace. You are not waiting to be chosen. You have chosen presence. What if the only thing left to find was your own clear frequency? You are still tuning, but you no longer fear the static. You know how to sit inside distortion until clarity hums again. You've become fluent in the pauses, the aches, the invisible arrangements of meaning that move through silence before they ever arrive in speech. This is your language now, the field, the breath, the subtle alignment of truth beneath form. You don't need to chase awakening anymore. You're already living inside it. Every moment you choose coherence over performance, presence over reaction, softness over control, you broadcast a signal into the shared web of awakening. This is how the world changes. Not through noise, but through quiet consistency. Through the invisible ones becoming visible by staying true. So let this moment hold. Let it echo through you long after these words end. Subscribe so we can meet again in the still places between sound. And when you're ready, the next story is already listening for your signal.